retelling a well-known short story by Leo Tolstoy, Papa Panov's Special Christmas. Papa Panov's Special Christmas, Sarah Bessel.
Started on Christmas Eve many years ago in a sleepy Russian village. As the short winter day turned to night, and the lights came on in the shops and the homes, the village shoemaker stood at the door of his shop. Old Papa Panov watched the children chattering happily as they bustled to their homes. He smelled the scents faint on the air of Christmas cooking and baking. He knew what kind of celebration his neighbors would be having, for he'd had such many times back when his wife was alive, when his children were still small, before they grew up and moved away. Yes, he knew what kind of celebrations they'd be having, but you could hardly see the laugh lines that were so common by his eyes behind his wire-rimmed spectacles. For Papa Panov's face was sad today. He would not have such a festive celebration this day. He closed the door on the shop, shuttered the windows against the cold night air, put some coffee on the charcoal stove to heat. Alone in his little room, he settled into his comfortable armchair and took the family Bible. Well, Papa Panov didn't often read, so he used his long forefinger to help follow and trace the words. As he read the familiar story of young Mary and Joseph, as they traveled weary and arrived in Bethlehem that night, so long ago, only to find there was no room at the inn. And so Mary had to give birth to the newborn Savior in the cowshed. Oh dear, Papa Panov cried to himself. If only they had come here. I would have made room for them. I would have given them my bed, he thought to himself. And then he continued reading. He read the story of the wise men who came from many, many miles away to present magnificent gifts to the newborn King of Kings. His heart fell. I have nothing to give to Jesus, he thought to himself. I have nothing magnificent, nothing. And then he thought of something. Up on a shelf at the top, he took down a dust-covered box and opened it. Inside, a tiny pair of shoes, baby shoes, worked in finest leather. Why, these really are remarkable, he thought to himself. They're every bit as good as I remembered. Quite the finest work I've ever done. I should like to give these to Jesus, he said. And he put the box back in its high spot. He sat down once again, started to read, but the firelight made the letters dance on the page in front of him. He blinked and blinked again, and then closed his eyes just for a moment to rest them. But in a trice he was asleep, and in a dream. And as it so often happens in that dream, he knew exactly who was in the dream. With him, it was Jesus. And in the dream, Jesus spoke to him. "You want to see me, Papa Panov?" said Jesus. "Tomorrow is Christmas Day. I will come to you," he said. "But have a care, for I will not tell you who I am." A start, Papa Panov awoke. The Christmas bells in the village were already ringing, and the thin light of morning had already started to come through the shutters. He got up stiff from his chair. Had he spent all night in it? Had that really happened? Put a special pot of coffee on the fire and opened up the shutters. Was his guest there? He looked out. Why, it was so early that none in the village were even stirring. Well, None save the road sweeper, whose job it was to clear the village pathways and roads of the ice and snow that had accumulated during the winter night. Papa Panov looked at him. Such a job, he thought, out in such blustery, horrible weather, and it's Christmas Day on top of it. So he opened up his little shop door, and the cold air blasted in. But it didn't bother Papa Panov. He called out, "Come over here! Come here and get warm!" So, the road sweeper came in. Papa Panov settled him near the fire. You could see the steam coming off of his wet garments as he sat there. It was so cold and damp and so warm inside. And his red hands cradled the comfortable warmth of the coffee cup. And as he drank, he couldn't help but notice that Papa Panov's eyes kept straying to the window. "Are you expecting someone, sir?" he said. And Papa Panov, somewhat shyly, told about his dream of the night before. As he finished the mug of coffee and prepared to go back to work, the road sweeper said to him with a smile, "Thank you, kind sir. You have given me more Christmas cheer than I've had in many a year. In fact, you deserve to have your dream come true." And he went back out into the cold, blustery air. Panov checked the house, put on some cabbage soup. Not that he was a good cook, not like any of the cooks around in the neighborhood, but it was a good soup, healthy and whole. And he waited and checked outside, out the shutters, no one. Out the door, no one in sight. A little while later he checked again and he almost missed her, for it was a very young woman, huddled, walking carefully and slowly, so slowly next to the buildings and the walls, letting them make a break from the bitter wind, and carrying something in her arms that seemed so awfully heavy. As the young woman drew nearer, Papa Panov suddenly realized she was carrying a baby, tiny and wrapped in a thin shawl, and his heart went out to the poor girl. "Come on in," he said, "come in and find some warmth and have some rest." And gratefully, the young girl let him shepherd her in and sit her right in that comfortable armchair. He fixed her some soup and said, "I'll put some milk on the fire to warm for the baby, and I'll feed her too. It's been a long time, but I still remember how to do it." A few minutes later, as he swooned the warm milk into the tiny mouth, he realized the baby's feet were very, very cold. He moved her as close to the fire as he dared for the warmth to settle in. As he fed her, the shoemaker said, "Your baby needs shoes." The young woman said, "I can't afford shoes. I have no husband to bring money home. I'm on my way to the next village to see if I can try to find work." His long arms, Papa Panov reached up to that box, for a thought had just struck him. And then he handed the baby and the box to the young girl. "Try these shoes on her," he said. "See if they fit." Well, of course, those beautifully worked leather shoes fit that baby perfectly. The young woman's face warmed in a smile. The little baby cooed and gurgled happily as she wiggled her warm toes in the leather shoes. Soon the young girl and her little child had to make their way again. But as she left, she stopped and she said, "I hope all of your Christmas wishes come true." She stepped out and was soon lost to sight in the midst of a crowd of neighbors, friends. But Papa Panov thought about her words. He thought, I don't know if my wish will come true. It's already late in the day, and I still don't see the stranger. Why, I see my neighbors on their social calls for Christmas, and a few beggars, but they're from town. He invited them in nonetheless, gave them a generous hunk of bread, and shared some of that soup, and sent them on their way again. But all too soon, that short winter day was turning to night, and the village was quiet once again. Papa Panov sat wearily into his chair. I guess it was just a dream, he said to himself. Jesus didn't come after all. But at that moment, he had the feeling there was someone else in the little room with him. No, it was not a dream. It was real. He was awake. And in the room with him was Jesus. And not only that, but he saw in front of him a procession of faces. The road sweeper, the young girl with the baby, the neighbors and friends he'd given a cheery Merry Christmas to, the beggars he'd fed and warmed and comforted. And each one of them, as they passed, whispered, "Did you see me? Did you see me? Did you see me, Papa Panov? Did you see me?" And bewildered, he cried, "Who are you?" And then Jesus spoke. That same voice from the dream last night. That same voice, that same person right in the room with him. I was hungry, and you fed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was cold and lonely, and you invited me in. In the faces of all the people you saw today, you welcomed and warmed me. The room was still once again. Only the ticking of the clock on the mantel, the crackle of the fireplace in the hearth. Papa Panov's heart was so full he wanted to sing, he wanted to shout, he wanted to dance with joy. The old shoemaker only sat, flat down in his armchair. He did come after all, was all he said.